Hi, hope you're well. In this one, I'm making a quick, cheap and easy guide rail adapter for your router. So a couple of weeks ago in the tool tote video, I used my Festool router rail attachment. I had a fair few comments about it. It's something that works really well, and around £40, $50. It's not the most expensive Festool accessory either, but it is proprietary. This one only works with this router. For example, if you want one for the bigger OF 1400 router, well, that's another £80, $100. Thank you very much. As the 10-Minute Workshop Plus members know, I've had a Guiderail router product on the drawing board for quite a while, and it occurred to me that I could actually use a stripped down, simplified version of that to make a near universal rail adapter for routers. You put a router on a rail for all the same reasons that you put a saw on a rail: controlled, accurate, straight cuts, especially if you want defined start and stop points, like routing a slot, for example, as you can put stops on the rail for that. My adapter is really simple. You can make it to fit any guide rail. I'm using the Festool one because it's what I use most, and I'm making this one from birch ply because it looks pretty in the thumbnail, to be perfectly honest. I made the test one from I made the test one from MDF on whatever bits of scrap I had lying around, and it works just fine. I made the base from a scrap of 6mm 1/4" ply, and you need a piece that's wide enough to cover the rail and overhang beyond the splinter guard onto the bench, and also deep enough front to back for your router base to sit on comfortably and be fully supported. A sheet of paper sized A4 or letter, for example, is usually good for standard sized rails on most routers, but you should adjust that to suit your rails and router, of course. I've already cut a strip off one end to fit into the trough on the rail between the central rib and the left-hand T-slot. That's a little under 32mm, 1.25" or thereabouts on the Festool rail, and it'll be a little less than that on Makita pattern rails because of that little lip that they have. So again, just measure what you have and cut it as close as you can. It doesn't have to be a perfect fit, as we'll be snugging it up onto the rib. So that's the basics of the adapter right there. We need a capping piece of some kind to connect those two pieces, and something under the overhang to make sure that it stays flat on the bench. I'm using some sheets of thin plywood that I bought off Amazon for a project that I haven't used yet. These are hobby or craft packs. Here in the UK you can get them in A4 or A3 sizes, 4 or 10 sheets to a pack. If you work out the price per square metre, it's a relatively expensive way of buying boards, but if you just want smaller sizes and quantities, and particularly several thicknesses, then they're handy to have. This is a 2mm board for the capping piece, as I want to keep the adapter as thin as possible, because the thicker you make it, the more you take away from the depth of cut, the depth of plunge that's available on your router. Obviously, if you have a bigger router, then you can use a thicker board. It's just something that you need to bear in mind. And under the body, alongside the rail, we need between 4 and 5mm for this rail, just to keep everything flat on the bench. I'm putting everything together with double-sided tape, and because I want a permanent bond, I'll be using the 3M strong double-sided tape, fitting the small section to the end of the capping piece first, keeping it nice and square. And then applying a little bit of pressure because it is adhesive after all. And then I'm fitting the body. When you do this, just squeeze both sections onto the rib to make sure you get a nice snug fit. Snug, but not too tight. And then you can apply a bit of pressure on the tape to get that adhesive working. For the support piece, I tried a couple of bits of the 2mm ply and found it just a little bit too thin, so I'm using a scrap of 3mm hardboard with the 2mm ply, and that seems to work pretty well. Again, strong double-sided tape does the job. And note that I've just set the support piece a little bit away from the splinter guard, just in case you need to use it on a different rail. And with that all done, I can just clean up the edges nice and square. By the way, it occurs to me that I use a few different double-sided tapes in the workshop. Let me know in the comments if you fancy a 5 top tapes video, as they're all used for different things. So we've got a nice steady platform that fits on the rail snugly but moves freely. To get the router attached, I'm just going to drill a 30mm hole to take a guide bush. Now this will fix it in place on the adapter. The Festool one is adjustable on the rods, of course, but to be honest, when you get the body of the router moving out beyond the support of the rail, it can get a little bit sketchy even with the side support foot. So I'll take a fixed distance with full support for the router any day of the week. Now it's up to you where you put this 30mm hole. You can have it centered at a set distance from the splinter guard. Just bear in mind that the splinter guard is something that gets trimmed and moved. Or you could just position it where it looks most settled, more or less centrally, and go from there, which is what I'm doing. This router has center marks on the body, so I can use those as a guide for the setting out. And then square those lines down with a marking knife. I'm using a marking knife because I want to use where those lines cross to locate the point of the Forstner bit to make sure it's centered. And then I can drill that out. And fill in the lines with some pencil, and maybe extend them down the sides of the adapter for good measure. So that's really all there is to it. It's a solid little platform that fully supports the base. It fits your guide rail snugly but moves freely, all made for pocket money from a few bits of scrap. And the basic design will work with any router that has a 30mm guide bush fitted regardless of the size. It's quick, it's easy, and it's cheap to make. Well, what's not to like? Well, not a whole lot, to be honest, so I'll call this one done for this week. Thanks so much for taking a look. If the idea of a universal guide rail adapter for a router, some kind of universal jig like this, appeals to you, one that would work with pretty much all the guide rails you can think of and does far more than this simple little jig, then be sure to put your name down on the product interest mailing list and I'll keep you up to date as all 10-minute workshop products progress. But that's all for this one. Thanks again for stopping by. I'll see you all again very soon. All right, take care.